question of where is regenerative economy happening in the world is a great one, because the answer is so easy, which is that go to any indigenous culture and you will find the regenerative economy. Now, it's not described as a regenerative economy, and the language needs translation, and maybe a translation beyond language. It's more a translation through worldviews, but this is really just, 21st century science validating what the only human culture that has actually stood the test of time actually already knows. And so it's fascinating to me that this is actually innate wisdom in our humanity. And I believe it's fair to say that our, particularly our surge of a quest for knowledge following the Middle Ages in the West blinded us to this wisdom. In fact, we literally crushed this wisdom.
Yeah.
And so, and in fact, I've spoken with, in front of, and with several indigenous groups, and I've learned to be very careful not to pretend like this is some modern Western invention by some, modern people who think they know more than they do. There's a guy in Australia who's in this regenerative community, and he said, and he's been in it longer than I have, and he said something to the effect of, he went and lived in an Aboriginal community in Australia, I think for like 3 months, and learned that he was a kindergarten. It was like going to he was in kindergarten compared to what they understood. So, but so that's the real answer. The answer that whoever asked the question was probably looking for, probably to my knowledge, the culture and traditions in the Nordic countries are probably closer to this than anything I'm aware of. And there's a lot of new interest in the Nordic system, and it's not the same, but the parallels are pretty strong. There's a lot of talk about stakeholder value and stakeholder this and stakeholder that, but the first comment I would have is that we certainly in the United States, and certainly in the context of public corporations and their boards of directors and what they really believe and are incentivize the whole organization around, and what really stresses them is the stock price, and breaking that chain. And of course the capital markets in public companies are systematically designed to not allow that not to be the focus. So this is a huge challenge, and happy talk at the Global Economic Forum and other places about stakeholder value and purpose of the corporation is well intended, and I think the people using it actually mean it. But when push comes to shove, we are still trapped in a shareholder value ideology. The second thing I would say about it is that stakeholder capitalism is a good, it's a step out of that trap, but it's reductionist. It's not okay to sort of list your 5 stakeholders and then check your box and say, I'm doing this for this and that for that. That's better than not, but it's very different than a more integral, holistic understanding. And one thing I learned in my holistic ranching experience is that if you think about all of the stakeholders, the health of the whole is only as healthy as the weakest link. So if you're great at 5, say you name your 7 stakeholders, and you're great and great value for all of them but one, but on the one, you're undermining the health of the whole system, you're a sick entity. And, it's like saying I'm really healthy except for that one piece of cancer in my lower intestine. Everything else is great. You're going to die if you don't have the whole thing healthy. And so in education, it's kind of the difference between, and this gets to one of the other discussion points, there's a big difference between multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary. And so we need the equivalent of transdisciplinary stakeholder value, where we literally can see it as a whole. And the excitement of the regenerative paradigm is that if we can work holistically toward the health of all stakeholders and identify opportunities to make interventions that have co-benefits across multiple stakeholders, that's how I believe we'll unlock this regenerative potential, which is the real source of our prosperity and future well-being. So, on the one hand, I'm a big fan of stakeholder approaches, and on the other hand, I see a huge danger that we get trapped in each of the parts as opposed to a true understanding of the whole. As we were joking earlier, there's a preponderance of females over males, but it's true, and there's, I think, good reason for that. There are incredibly courageous, strong women who I jokingly but seriously to their face call them women warriors, who tackle things that are unbelievably challenging. There's an island off the coast of Newfoundland called Fogo Island, where this woman went to Silicon Valley and made a small fortune during the telecom boom in the 90s, but grew up on this island, and that was her home. And the island's economy got decimated when the fishing industry collapsed. And she went back and essentially invested all of her earnings in regenerating this island economy, anchored by a hotel that was designed by a Norwegian architect to be very much reflective of that place. In fact, before they put up the hotel, they built artist studios, and she filmed the communities on the island and allowed the essence of the island culture to drive the whole thing. Wow. And, no one in their right mind would take their entire fortune and plop it into a tourist attraction hotel that takes 2 days to get to for most parts of the world. But the cool thing is that all the furniture in the hotel was made by the former boat builders. The hotel is expensive enough that most people stay there one night and then spend the rest of their week in a bed and breakfast. So it creates, economic opportunity, not just for the hotel, but for et cetera, et cetera. No sane person would do that. But she's done that. And I can tell you 5 other stories like that. And she doesn't use the framing regenerative economy, but what she's doing is regenerative economy. I think the key is not to, and this again gets into one of the other great questions in your discussion. To me, this is not about hiring a consultant who has the answers and will come in, parachute in for 2 weeks and put the script up on the wall. It requires, the best thing that someone like me can do is to share, to me, this is why the principles are so key. In every context, the answer is going to be different. That's one of the qualities of a complex system. So the context that in any company or in any government entity or in any local economy or in the global economy is what is where the answer to the question is. And so if we bring together caring, thoughtful, passionate people who are interested to learn how to see the problems in a new way, they will find the answers. I believe that. If you actually get people to buy into the regenerative paradigm, then they have no choice but to look at concentration of power through the lens of healthy living systems. And, you know, the metaphor I always use is, you know, the oak tree or the lion are the most powerful, you know, parts in a forest or in a jungle. And the oak tree is the source of life for more other creatures than it takes. It gives more than it takes. And the lion sleeps most of the day and just culls the herd to keep it in balance. Yeah. Whereas the lion could eat everything he wanted to, or could kill everything he wanted to, and just leave it for waste. And so there's obvious lessons for government policy about how to incent and tax or penalize or regulate industry so that business begins to look more like a living system. And in the United States, we have antitrust laws, but they're organized around the idea that competition is good and consumers, cheap prices for consumers is the goal. Mm-hmm. And so the only way to, and it's been watered down by, you know, political influence from big business. But the concept of, you know, and this comes from Milton Friedman, right-wing free market economics, there's a recognition that in the capitalist system, there's a tendency toward a concentration of power, and that's anti-competitive, and therefore that's bad for consumers. All we need to do is to kind of tweak it to say that, you know, excess power of any form can be used for the health of the system, or can be used to extract from the system. And so, you know, Amazon is a great example. Amazon's not hurting consumers, right? So there's no ability to use our antitrust laws to go after Amazon because they've given you and me lower prices and convenience we never had before. Yeah. But they're using their power in a way that's not healthy for the system. So we have to rethink our antitrust laws in that framework. And I believe that unless we first, in a sense, sell the framework, it's almost impossible to have the policy conversation because you're talking in different languages to people. Someone said to me that the civil rights movement in the United States, we attribute to Martin Luther King. 30 years before Martin Luther King showed up, women were having conversations around their kitchen tables over coffee. And that's really where the civil rights movement happened. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we're the women having coffee in our kitchen tables. Mm-hmm. And eventually there will be this network that makes it onto the mainstream media. And suddenly all the politicians that are driving you crazy will be rushing to get in front of this parade. Mm-hmm. And that's what's going to happen. Yeah. I just don't know how long it's going to take.
No, that's
yeah, but I also think so. Yeah, I believe in that as well.
It's a positive vision. So yeah, that's good. Yeah.
It has to happen. And the worse things get, the more the pressure is for it to happen. So that's
it's true. Sometimes it's good to remember that, but when you're in it, then and when it's a kind of tricky situation, then it's difficult to see the positive future.
Yeah, but then I think to reconnect in nature, to reconnect to people who are, haven't forgotten about it. It's really helpful, I think.
It's true.
Yeah.
But you know, every time I get really stuck, and I just had an example of this recently on something I'm working on here, and it seems hopeless. Like there's no way. Like we have, I won't bore you with the details, but there's a project where, like the participants just don't get along, and yet they own this project. Yeah. And I'm an outside board member brought in, but you know, it's not solvable with these two
No.
parties there, and neither of them are going away because they've both invested a lot of money in it. And so I was like, and I don't want to give up on this because I feel very passionately about it. But now we have a different idea on how to do it, and it's like a breath of fresh air. And to cut to the chase, we're going to try to turn this into a nonprofit and essentially buy out the current partners, but in a way that'll make them feel like they succeeded to get it to it,
Yeah.
And so every time you get stuck, go for a run and bring in new people and new ideas.
Add new ideas, add new people, new ingredients. Yeah. I think that's the solution.